Well, good afternoon and welcome to MedTech Crossroads. We're so glad you're here. Today, episode 74, September 10th. I gotta say, my mouth is watering. My guest today and I were just chatting about the apples that are coming in season here in Michigan. We're gonna have to get to that during the show. But our official schedule today, COVID Connect, the COVID news, what's going on in the state of Michigan. After that, my guest, Eric VanMiddendorp from Spectrum Health. We're gonna talk about his career, his work, the kinds of things that Spectrum Health does, Spectrum Health Innovations in particular, as well as a really cool new program that they're launching that he's gonna tell us about at the end. After that, Pitch Party round number 4, our second presentation, Kevin White of Maverick BioMedical will be with us. And after that, Q&A and announcements as usual. But with that, let's get into the COVID news, COVID metrics, and vaccine distribution, of course, all through the news. This week, President Biden's announcement. We're not going to dive into that, into the political aspects of that right now. We're going to look at what's happening in the country. The transmission level by county remains about where it is. I probably could have left last week's slide from the CDC up. High levels of transmission throughout the U.S. And community transmission level by county in the state of Michigan. We'll look at this by vaccination status towards the end of this presentation. But very much like last week, high transmission all throughout the state of Michigan, the third wave, if you will, when you look at that rightmost graphic. So we're definitely seeing high transmission. COVID admissions per 100 inpatient beds. Of course, the state of Michigan not doing too badly in that regard, but some of the southern states and the western states with counties that are having not a good time at all. As we've mentioned before, a hospital has to run about 80 out of 100 beds full to stay profitable. That means that 20 beds extra is filling them up. That's why that 20 or more number is important and why it turns red there. New cases in the state of Michigan definitely continuing to go up. Haven't found the top of that yet. The positivity rate, however, peaking over a little bit, so that could be good news. And the deaths, thankfully, staying very, very low compared to previous waves in the state of Michigan. In terms of hospital admissions, this may be a little bit of good news. This is going up nowhere near as fast as it was during those first two waves, staying relatively low. So hopefully that will be some good news that we might find a top there in the near future if these curves have any trends to them. In terms of vaccinations nationally, continues to rise but appears to be plateauing once again. Of course, the peak was reached in April of last year, and we are still just barely creeping up from the low in July. In terms of the state of Michigan, this has just been a fascinating picture that we've continued to follow. COVID-19 reported cases per 100,000 population in the last 7 days, and how it differs based on vaccination status of the county. Is more than half of the population vaccinated, or is it some fraction of 50%? You see that across the vertical axis of the key there in the bottom right, but cases per 100,000 in the last 7 days across the horizontal axis. The first thing you'll notice is that everything's to the right. Most of the colors are from the right side of that column, which means high caseloads. What's less clear, though, is how it relates to vaccination status. We've got about 22 counties with robust vaccination that are still in that highest spread category. We've got about 17 counties that are in the lowest vaccination category, but still in the high spread category, and everything in between. So not a lot of correlation there. Thought it'd be interesting also to look at the excess deaths. This is something we haven't looked at in a long time, but something that CDC has been tracking from the very start. So this graphic straight from CDC's excess deaths. And what you see there with the blue bars is the number of deaths per week in the U.S. from all causes, all the way back to January of 2017. The yellow line is the statistical significance threshold, meaning if deaths pop above that line, it's statistically significant. It's a deviation from what we were expecting to see in the US. And of course, the 2017-2018 flu season barely popped above that line, but it was statistically significant as a thing that was out of the ordinary in terms of deaths. And then of course, when COVID hit, we were well above that line for 3 national waves. Of course, dropping back very, very close to that statistically significant line throughout the spring of this year. A little bit of false sense of security because now that is well above again. We don't know whether that's rising or dropping off, but it corresponds very closely to the size of the curve last late summer. And so that's going to be really interesting to watch. The pessimistic may look at that fall and winter curve and say, you know what, that could be coming again. We'll just have to see. But this is the current state of excess deaths as reported by the CDC. Also, this weekly counts of deaths by age group, another really interesting statistic we haven't looked at a lot. But for those who like to look at these numbers and see what it's done by age group, the gray lines are what was happening in 2015 through 2019, a baseline, if you will, for each of these age groups. Red is 2020, yellow is 2021, yellow or orange. For the under 25-year age group, those lines are basically unchanged, not statistically different from each other. This is, again, weekly counts of deaths by age group. A little bit of an uptick for the 25 through 44-year group. Much larger uptick for the 45 through 64-year group. Although you see that that is actually coming back down at this point. The 65 through 74-year group got really above the baseline, coming down again now, but we'll see where that goes. Similarly for the 75 to 84 and 85 and older, significant differences in those groups. Again, just the raw data from CDC, something that we don't often get a chance to look at with all the news out there, but that is the historical breakdown over the last 2 years compared to a baseline of 2015 through 2019. So really interesting to look at that as well. Let's get to some local news. Our friends at Renaissance Venture Capital reached out and said, hey, could you announce the Hot List and Undemo Day? Jeff Reinveldt, the Hot List and Undemo Day is back and virtual for fall of 2021. The Hot List is a curated list of best early stage companies that are doing venture fundraising in 6 to 12 months. Companies are invited to participate in Undemo the afternoon of October 13th and connect with hundreds of venture investors from around the country. I believe Jeff also mentioned to me that they are roughly 50 plus early stage companies that they're looking for. There's no cost to apply or attend. You can apply at renvcf.com/hotlist-application. Company submittals are due by noon Eastern Daylight Time on Monday, September 20th. So that date is coming up pretty quickly. Get the word out there. This is a great thing for companies to go be part of if you want to get in front of investors. What a great opportunity. You're being asked to make a pitch out there. That's just great. It sounds like they are going to be one-on-one meetings with investors. The highest selected companies will be included in 5-minute live pitches to the full event audience. And in the spring of 2021, when they did this, they had over 500 meetings happening. So pretty cool. It's great to see the community doing this, exactly the kind of thing we want to promote and get out there. Let people know about it. renvcf.com/hotlist-application. Also, the A2 Biosocial is happening again. It's a monthly gathering of the Ann Arbor area's biotech community, presented by MishBio, Ann Arbor Spark, and MyLead Consulting. And it's happening September 14th, coming up at 4:30 p.m. at York in Ann Arbor. So they will be at York on September 14th. Make sure to go if you're in the area. Well, with that, I'm going to stop the share. It is time for our guest today. Our guest today is Eric VanMiddendorp of Spectrum Health Innovations, and Eric is with us. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Gene.
I'm so glad you're here today. And of course, you and I were talking earlier about the fall apple season, both with kids, both living in the wonderful state of Michigan, and it's a tradition. You actually do have a favorite type of apple. You got to tell us what it is.
I do, yeah. Big fan of the Honeycrisp. Nice,
Big
big,
fan of the
juicy, sweet
Honeycrisp.
apples. Can't go wrong. Make great
I, I'm
applesauce too.
I'm definitely not a favorites kind of a guy, but I sort of had taken to Fuji, and I guess what I'm not aware of at this point is Fuji out? Like, are we still allowed to like Fuji?
I have
You
no idea.
got a second from our audience. I second that. You got another Honeycrisp lover in the audience. Well, Eric, I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while, and it was a program that Spectrum is starting up that we're going to hear about at the end that really triggered this. But as long as I've known you, and we've known each other in the community for quite a few years, you've always struck me as a person who, an engineer's engineer. Obviously, your talents go way beyond that, but I've seen you lead a bunch of medical device projects from inception to human use and company formation and all these things. So you're well versed in all these things. I thought it'd be really good to have you on and talk about your background, about what you've done with Spectrum Health Innovations, and then a little bit more about the entity itself, because you're positioned at a really interesting place inside the company, and you're coming out with really cool programs too. So we want to touch on each of those three things. But I
Awesome.
wonder if you could first give our audience just a little bit of background about yourself, how you came to do what you do with Spectrum.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for that great intro, Gene. Yeah, so I've been in this space for about 8 years now. Started out as an engineering student at Grand Valley State University, so grew up on the west side. Bounced around all different kinds of engineering, just always loved it. So did a little bit of product design, manufacturing engineering, biomedical, mechanical. And I did internship at ATech Medical when I was an undergrad student at Grand Valley, just to get my feet wet in the manufacturing space. I learned pretty quickly that all of that paperwork isn't for me. And so I really wanted to focus on moving more into product development. Had a pretty cool opportunity as a grad student to partner with Spectrum Health Innovations, which was just starting to move more into the product development space, and in addition to Grand Valley State University and at the time GR Current, to try and develop 3 medical devices in a year. So they wanted a grad engineering student, grad business student, and an entrepreneur in residence. I said, great, I'd love to do it. What a cool opportunity, just to really get in there, get to the front lines and actually talk with the people who are facing these problems. And that's always been a big thing for me too. I love engineering. I'm a big nerd in that way. But what I've always wanted to do is actually see the things that I design, that I develop, that I work on to actually make a direct impact on someone and a positive impact on patient care. And so I jumped right in. It actually led to me spinning out my own startup company. And I've been running that on the side for about 6 years now. And then I was able to join the Spectrum Health team full time.
It's very cool. Tell us just a little bit about that startup as well. It'd be good to get that in here as well.
Yeah, of course. So my startup company is Airway Innovations, and we developed a breathing tube holder for hospital patients on mechanical ventilation. It's those tube holders really haven't changed in about 20 years. There hasn't been any new competitors, and so there's really a lot of opportunities there. Our primary focus is preventing what's called an unplanned extubation, which is when a patient wakes up from their sedation, they're really confused, and they'll actually reach up and pull out their breathing tube. That leads to a whole host of bad things, including ventilator-associated pneumonia, potentially death. And so we found a great solution to that, but we've really been iterating our product over the last year to address a lot of these short-term problems that are becoming a lot more prevalent during COVID, such as skin integrity, pressure ulcers, and things of those nature. So pretty cool product. We really just commercialized, I'd say, right around July of this year. We're just starting to sell to our first few customers and starting to ramp up.
That's very cool. And kudos to Spectrum for allowing you to pursue that. Of course, that cross-pollination, seeing so many projects and getting to work on them, enables a person like you to be able to speak with authority to the process of medical device development. And if we look at that process for just a minute, Eric, and we think to ourselves, and you and I have both run into so many companies, so many innovators, and you get to do it from within the walls of a healthcare system. So I'm sure you talk to innovators, doctors. Somebody says, "I've got this great idea."
Mhm.
What are the typical things that you bump into time and time again where somebody comes to you and you find yourself educating them because you've been through this process so many times of
Mhm.
development. What are the typical things that you find yourself educating these innovators about?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, our team has reviewed a few thousand ideas since I've been there. I'd say honestly, about 90% of the time, the most common thing we see is it already exists. Most people just need to go
Mm,
out there, do a Google search, do a light competitive review, and there's probably something out there that they can already go and purchase or something that's in development that's going to hit the market soon, and we'll just point them in that direction. 90% of the time, that's what we see. Otherwise, it comes down to really just education around the problem and how to create a really thorough value analysis. Is there enough value here that if we solve this problem, someone's actually going to go and purchase your solution? And that can be pretty nuanced and it varies depending on what type of problem you're trying to solve. But that's where we spend most of our time. There's obviously other things that you have to consider when you're doing initial analysis. You have to look at intellectual property. There's usually a pretty crowded IP landscape. But those are by far where we spend most of our time educating our staff.
that value analysis is an interesting point because obviously the company that ignores it, they ignore it to their own peril. They charge out and don't really know what their market is. But I've often noticed that there's companies and efforts that get underway that they might be onto something, but they haven't quite found the right fit. But it's a little bit
Hmm.
of that back and forth that happens. A long past public example of that was our friends over at Accuray Cytometers that came out of University of Michigan.
Hmm.
Their original intention was to be for testing machining fluid, and they ended up with a cytometer. And it was kind of there was something there, but it had to go through a process of discovery personally or corporately. Like, how do you guys think about that? When is an idea one where it's like, well, we should move this along slowly and let it have chances to try market fits? When do you look at it and just go, it really only has one market fit and we're just going to say either go or no go on it? How do you play that game? It's a really challenging part of the process.
It really is. And yeah, it's definitely an iterative process. I think what we've found is anytime we get an idea for a solution, there's a napkin sketch, maybe even something a little more far along like a prototype, we actually just take a step back. We say, okay, that's great that you have a prototype. Maybe there's something there, but we're going to
Mhm.
focus on this problem first and make sure we understand it. Do you have the right solution? Is this applicable somewhere else? And we'll do that before we even get into it. And we also do a lot of partnerships with local universities, so Grand Valley State University, Kendall College of Art and Design, and we'll partner with their students to spend an entire semester just looking into that problem. What is all the different competition? How do you currently solve this problem internally here at Spectrum Health and other healthcare systems? And once we start to get a good feeling for that, we'll throw their solution back into the mix, sprinkle in another 10 to 50, and just see what fits. What do you like about this? What do you like about that? Maybe this has a different problem that it's actually solving that we didn't even think about. And then we'll kind of narrow in and pick one solution to move forward with. But it's always a matter of just taking a step back. It's not necessarily the solution that matters the most at first. Once you have a really good understanding of that problem and that value analysis, it'll actually help you choose which solution to go forward with. Because a lot of times you can add in additional features to what you initially thought your product was going to be and actually bring significantly more value out into the market.
That seems like an important principle to highlight, and I know other customer discovery programs. I think of iCore and the bits
Hmm.
we've heard about that have a similar principle, which is if you're going to talk, you're going to talk to customers. That's one of their principles, and when you do, you're not allowed to tell them what you're thinking of
Yep,
creating. Which it sounds like that's you guys are taking that same approach from an internal management perspective of the project.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think one lesson learned too on the value side, even with my own startup, is there's different types of value. There's the short-term immediate cost savings that you might see, which is great. So let's say, hey, you're coming in at a lower price point than the competition. Granted, that's next to impossible if you're a startup company at low volumes. Or you have the cost savings of removing a nurse from the specific operation, let's say an OR tech from the operating room. Those are great things. And you really need to try and drive some immediate value to get people excited because that's the way most purchasing leads tend to think in the hospital now. There's a shift towards value-based care, but everybody's always got their mind on, okay, what's the bottom line and what am I saving right now? And then there's the longer term value. And those might be more things like cost avoidance. So say with my product, we're preventing unplanned extubations. Well, not everybody tracks those. We know that per the literature, you can save a significant amount of money, but not everybody's willing to put the money in now to prevent that. But they're more than willing to pay for something that's going to prevent, these immediate skin pressure ulcers breakdown. And that's why we had to bring that back into our product before we could really launch. And so you really got to understand what type of value you're bringing and how are you proving it. And so what type of data do you
Mm,
have to back it up at the end of the day?
that's a huge part of it. That's going to come down to something we're going to talk about towards the end of our discussion, which is you guys are actually making steps for external companies to be able to get some of those kinds of information, which is really cool.
Mhm.
What kinds of projects do you guys tend to work on? What kinds of things? Maybe you can give us a smattering of examples that have gone through Spectrum Health Innovations.
Yeah, of course. So since we're essentially a resource for all of the employees at Spectrum Health, we see just about anything. Most typically, we tend to be engaged with our nursing frontline staff. And so we see a lot of the single-use disposables, something that's going to be used in the OR, at the bedside. But we do see some more complex devices from a lot of our physicians as well. The sweet spot for our group over the year has been that class 1, class 2 type medical devices, typically MedTech, although we're moving more into software, which I'll talk about a little bit later too in my presentation. But those are products where you don't need as much as far as resources to help bring them forward. And we have a lot of local partnerships that we can leverage to help work on some of those things. And so one example would be a patient transfer device that we worked on since launched into a company, the patient company that's bringing that product to market. So it's for lateral patient transfers, so you don't have to have 6 to 8 nurses try and grab onto a bed sheet and pull the patient from one bed to another. Leads to a lot of injuries. It's not great for the patient as well. And so that's kind of an electromechanical solution that we had worked on. We've also worked on an external catheter for female patients to avoid catheter-associated urinary tract infections. So it's more of a single-use disposable type product. But again, the patient interaction aspects, a lot like with my tube holder, are really quite complex. But those are things that we're able to navigate really well because it's very easy for us to get in there and talk to the healthcare providers.
Oh, those are very cool. I resonate with what you said also about some of those, even those class 1 devices too. I think it's an overlooked area, and I know you share that kind of a very practical mentality where it's like when you really understand what it takes to bring a device to market, it does motivate you to look and say, what are the things that we can solve easily with a lower regulatory burden? And oftentimes companies will just overlook class 1 opportunities. I often find academics too will often overlook class 1 opportunities because they don't realize just how easy it would be to get that to market
Exactly.
versus something else. We could talk shop on that for days on end. Well, I'm going to have you bring up your presentation. I think it'd be good to give everybody a little bit of a background on Spectrum Health Innovations. Tell us a little bit more about the entity, where it fits in Spectrum Health, and what you guys do.
Absolutely. Let me get that pulled up. Are you able to see my screen, Gene?
You are looking good. There we go.
All right, sounds good. Well, I already gave you a little bit of background on myself. So a lot of you are probably familiar with Spectrum Health. We're a pretty large healthcare system over here on the west side of Michigan, soon to be on the east side as well with the business partnership we're exploring with Beaumont. But right now we're about 14 hospitals in total, about 32,000 employees and close to 5,000 physicians. And what's cool about our system is you really see all types. We have the large, urgent care center in Grand Rapids. We're really highly acute patients, all the way out to all of our different regional hospitals. And so we see all sorts of patients and all sorts of providers here in our healthcare system. And our team is the innovations team. We're a dedicated resource for any employee at Spectrum Health who has a problem they just can't solve, or they have an idea for a new medical device, new technology that could potentially be commercialized. And so we'll help them all the way from, a napkin sketch idea or even just a problem, all the way through to something that we can hopefully bring in and test in our patients and commercialize and bring to market. And that's, again, our goal. We are probably better labeled the Office of Commercialization, where we're looking to launch new and novel technologies. And so since 2017, we formed a lot of partnerships. We're pretty well connected with folks, universities such as KCAD, Central Michigan, Grand Valley State University, Hope. and other people in the market as well. So Keystone Solutions Group on the manufacturing side, Market Lab, and other industry partners that we've worked with over the years. And since I've started, we've seen this actually number is probably quite low, well over 3,000 ideas. We've got about 13 active patents and 13 products in use, which is really most important, and 15 licenses. And we've been able to really effectively leverage grants, state grants, to help move these products forward and kind of get past that point of, hey, I've got a great, rough prototype, to here's something we can actually test and prove it works, which is what you need to really get it to market and to get additional funding. And Gene, if you're ready, I can kind of jump into this new model that our team is pretty excited about launching too.
Yeah, I want you to jump there. Something you just said reminded me of something that you and I had chatted before about when you mentioned the state funding, and obviously the state has done a great job of reaching out there and being very responsive and creating pathways for early stage companies to get those first dollars, to get proof of concept and stuff like that. I know that you mentioned that over your, when you and I were chatting before, that over your career, you've started to look more at where's that future funding going to come from. So not just who could buy this thing, but also how are we going to get this thing all the way across the finish line. Say
Mhm.
just a bit more about that, Eric, because I think it's a really, really important point. Oftentimes, startups are so focused on where am I going to get that first dollar, and maybe they think they can see how the thing is going to sell long term, but in between is this valley of death. How do you approach that today, maybe versus how you approached that at the beginning of your career?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think when most people who are kind of new to the business try and approach a problem, they look at it and say, okay, how much total do I need to get this product to market to fully commercialize it? I need to raise that much. Let's say it's $1 million. That can be incredibly challenging, especially if you're really early in the product development life cycle. And so, from what I've seen, especially if you have the opportunity to leverage some of these grants, your best bet is to first understand what are all the different pieces that go into the funding I'm going to require. So what are the regulatory requirements and costs? Probably double that based on what you think they're going to be. What's the development, manufacturing side, and then just your typical run rate and staffing. Once you can understand that, break it down into your full timeline. What are the key milestones? Maybe 3 or 4 between where you're at now and where you're at when you're actually selling to patients. And if you can really effectively break down your milestones and show how when you get to the first one, it eliminates a certain amount of risk and will then allow you to get additional funding to get to the next one. You can slowly work your way towards commercialized product. And that's what I've done, with my own startup, leveraging grants such as Skip TCA, the Business Accelerator Fund, and then getting small pieces of investment to slowly work my way to a commercialized product. And we do the same thing here at Spectrum Health too. We're able to leverage partnerships, which are incredibly important. You have to have the right people in the room and share our equity rather than have a lot of upfront costs to get us to a really good prototype. And then we can go out after these grant funding mechanisms, which can then get us to some really strong data, eliminate all the design risk, and then all that's left is to really launch a company, which investors are a lot more happy to put their money into if they know there's not the other risk associated with the design of the product.
What's your sweet spot for that company launch? Because it was just a conversation we were having not that long ago where there's a lot of bootstrapping you can do in the early days of an idea, and it's better because you're not giving away the company, you're not taking debt on, and you can do that. And if it takes a little bit longer or you have to cut some corners, well, it's okay. You're getting to where you need to be, and you'll get there. There
Mhm.
does come a point though where you have to kind of now you got to deliver, and it takes funding, et cetera. Where's the sweet spot in your mind for taking, an equity deal with somebody or maybe going out for a VC? Where does company formation happen? Where is it just staying in the back room? Do you have a rule of thumb for that?
Yeah, as far as kind of the early stage company formation, I think do it, wait as long as you can. If you're able to leverage other funding opportunities, like for us as a nonprofit, there's certain grants we can go after. We're going to take advantage of as much of that as we can before we start to spin it out into a startup, because there's really different and likely more limited opportunities once you do that. I think it makes most sense to go for an equity play and try to raise money once you have at least some bench testing data for a med tech type product, something to show that this is not only a strong concept, we have something to prove that it's going to work. And we're able to put a really formal business plan around how, if we're able to commercialize this, we're going to see that large ROI. And in Michigan, I doubt you'll be able to raise funding before that. It's going to be really, really challenging, just in the general market right now.
Yeah. Well, so it's all about de-risking. It's all about getting the idea as far along as you can, finding out if
Exactly.
there is a business need for it. And of course, as you and I both know, there comes a point where, okay, we're going down this path. Maybe we're making the business argument up front. Maybe we haven't really started, design controls and everything else. Oh, but as you and I are both intimately familiar, and as we've talked about many times on the show, there comes the point where you're asking, what are my user needs actually? You're doing it at a business planning standpoint, you're doing it at an FDA
Hmm.
standpoint. You guys are doing something about this, and this is the slide that's up on the screen. So I'd love for you to tell us more about this program, which I think, as far as I'm aware, is quite unique in the state. Um, Voice of the customer. Tell us more, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you mentioned, Gene, I think is something that should be highlighted. Don't start the regulatory process too late. If you're trying to launch a new medical device, that can become very expensive and very time consuming versus if you integrate it throughout the process, from just the early concept design even, it makes it a lot more streamlined and you're way less likely to miss something that's going to become really expensive to fix down the road. I've done it and it's best to avoid that if you can. Um, but yeah, happy to explain this new service that Spectrum Health Innovations is launching. We kind of called it how it is, voice of the customer, where we're looking to provide access to all of the subject matter experts, all of these people here at Spectrum Health that we work with to develop our own products. Our focus historically at innovations has been to really look inward to our employees, develop all of this IP ourselves, and then license it out. But now our team is tied in really closely with our ventures department, which has allowed us to shift our focus and say, well, maybe we need to work more as an ecosystem and allow some of these external opportunities to come in. And that actually is going to drive innovation across our entire portfolio. And so this new service is again really just looking to get anyone access to our Spectrum Health employees. It could be not just your clinicians, but anyone in our system, any of your key stakeholders who have a hand in whatever type of solution you're looking to develop. And so these don't have to be devices or ideas that Spectrum Health is developing, but it's the company that's coming to us. And that way, it can really inform their design process and help them with that value analysis, the competitive analysis that we were discussing earlier to help develop a product that is going to hopefully make an impact at Spectrum Health or at other healthcare systems, across the US as well. And so essentially how it works is any company who's looking to develop something can come to us and we'll really manage and facilitate the entire process. You can tell us who you're looking to speak to, and we can, based on our experience, maybe throw a couple other names onto that list. And then we'll set up the meetings, we'll set up interviews, surveys. And I think what makes us really unique versus some of these other services that are out there is you can come on site. And so we can actually go through and maybe you can watch a surgery. You can go ahead and do some usability testing with us. We can maybe set up some simulated use testing for you. Really throughout your entire product development lifecycle, we can try and add that value through our clinical and other stakeholder expertise. And so again, what's in it for the company is validating those need statements. They're going to start out on a really strong foot. Then as they're exploring their other concepts, they can come and revalidate those as well. And they can really develop a fully vetted product, which is incredibly important. And we think it's good timing because nowadays, especially with COVID, it is incredibly difficult to get into a healthcare system. And so we're looking to facilitate that access. And what we're hoping is it will lead to co-developments where we can partner on these products. Maybe there's a startup company who has a really large strategic value they can offer to Spectrum Health, and we can work with them through our ventures portfolio and team, and maybe it leads to research, but all of these things really help improve patient care for us. And most anything is in scope along this product development process, exploring needs requirements through interviews, concept development, model evaluation, like I mentioned, and also, post-launch evaluation. We're not committing to purchasing a product in any way. I have to say that disclaimer, but if there is some tie in there and we do see value here at Spectrum Health, it might help make some introductions. And maybe it would lead to some studies through our research department where we could show that it works. And that's really the model overall. But we're really excited about it. And we're hoping that people will hopefully reach out to us soon and we can help launch some more of these programs.
That's a pretty rare offer because people are often in startups, unless they have the clinical links already, they're often asking themselves, how do I get in touch with clinicians to discuss my idea? I might be doing it to write a business plan. I might be doing it so that I can validate my user needs. Is this really what we're going to go to validation with? And you guys are offering that as a through the door thing, which is so cool. I guess one question that comes to mind, and I'll welcome our audience too. If you have questions for Eric, feel free to drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A, raise your hand. We can let you ask them live. But the thing that comes first to mind, and I know it's something that our company had to go through when we started working with larger institutions and healthcare systems and things like that, was the question of intellectual property. They wanted to know, if you're going to work on our project, we need to own the IP, and of course that's right. If you're paying for it, we're going to assign it to you. How does that work you mentioned co-development. What is that going to look like in something like this? I can understand if it's just a quick interview where somebody says, yes, we like this, no, we don't like that. Maybe not a lot of opportunity for IP creation, but I could see a more complex engagement leading to that. How will you guys pursue that aspect?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And we're setting it up more per the standard where it's primarily a fee for service model. That's where we expect most of these types of engagements to go, where you're paying for access to our subject matter experts. They'll provide feedback, guidance, and then you retain all of the IP. Now, there is the opportunity for these co-developments where we could potentially get some skin in the game too. So that's potentially a play through our ventures team where we can get some equity in the company. And in that case, there might be shared IP or some other type of agreement. But I think those will be more rare, but we're more than willing to get creative. We've seen all different types of deals that we could leverage.
It's a really cool offering, and something that I think will have a lot of benefit for startups to be able to get. Because honestly, there's rarely a way to get on somebody's calendar, and you guys are offering that sort of a service, which is really cool. And presumably, when you're working on an internal project, this is something that you can, if you're working inside of a healthcare system, you've got that kind of an access. What kind of a role would you say that's played for you in your development projects, having that kind of access? Because I don't know if you've experienced a lot of them outside of the system, but I know it's a big need. How has that access affected you in your development? What has it enabled you to do?
Yeah, great question. I think it allows us to move really quickly. We're able to get feedback from multiple stakeholders across the system within a few weeks rather than trying to do it over the course of a couple months, which can help us understand that value analysis really quickly and decide if it's something we want to pursue. And that's where we'll kind of make a go/no decision really quickly. It also helps us iterate. I'd mentioned we'll look at, up to 50 concepts with the university over a semester. We can just throw those in front of people really quickly, get feedback, incorporate changes, and then do another design loop really quickly. So that's been great. I think one lesson learned from us is it's good to look at other healthcare systems. You have to look outside your walls and make sure that the problem that, even though it's really big at Spectrum Health, let's say, it's also being faced nationally in other areas in different regions. And so that's part of why we've been motivated to help launch this too, is it's difficult for us even to get into other healthcare systems. And so we're trying to kind of open the door there.
Lead the way on that, because this is the kind of thing, if you're developing something, you'd like to know what someone on the other side of the state or in a different state is doing. And yeah, open your door first. That's a great bit of leadership there. We like that. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is really cool, Eric. I am so glad that we've gotten to spend the time today on this. And for anyone who's listening, I just got to say, Eric's been a pillar in the MedTech community for years, and I've always looked at him as sort of that quiet powerhouse who just knows the process and is working that process and has been through it. And it's just really cool to see what you guys are doing and identifying these high value things for Spectrum Health Innovations that, if you just had come out of school, you would never have thought to yourself, okay, we need this kind of a thing, right? But after you've seen that process time in and time out, it becomes obvious, and then you're doing it. And so kudos to you and your team for putting something like that together. We'll definitely be knocking on your door and exploring that more with you over here at Into Being. So
awesome. Thank you, Gene.
Appreciate having you on the show today. And any parting words for our audience?
No, I don't think so. But really appreciate the opportunity, and really appreciate the kind words too, Gene. That means a lot coming from you. So thanks again for having me on.
Keep doing what you're doing.
All right, will do.
We'll be in touch. Thanks, Eric. Love it. Well, next up, it is time, the time you've all been waiting for, the pitch party, the $2,500 quarterly pitch party. I'm starting to sound like a carnival barker, but we do like to call it a party, not a competition, because these companies are not in the same vertical. We can't really judge them against each other. What we do look at, though, our judges look at, is whether they are hitting the kinds of points that funders need to hear about to make them investable. And so we have our pitch party every Friday during this third quarter. A startup pitches for 10 minutes. Companies that want to participate, you just got to be a US-based MedTech startup. Send your pitch decks to pitchparty@medtechcrossroads.org to be eligible for selection. Make sure your PowerPoint has the areas of problem statement, vision, value proposition, team, milestones, business model, competitors, and your ask, or the functionally equivalent areas. Our wonderful judges, Andy Rader, Dr. Nikki Kennedy, Jim Metzger, and Stacy Frankovich, will be with us during the last show after all the pitches are complete to judge these and to offer up their ideas, what they liked, what they didn't like, and to tip their hat towards one that gets the $2,500 prize. With that, I want to welcome Kevin White. Kevin White is with us today from Maverick BioMedical. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shane. Appreciate being here.
We're glad to have you. Bring that PowerPoint up, and we're going to bring 10 minutes on the clock. I'll give you a warning when there's 2 minutes left and when there's 1 minute left. But otherwise, once you've got that up, we'll welcome you to take it away.
All right. Well, yeah, as he mentioned, we are Maverick BioMedical, where we provide affordable independence through badass design. I would like to start by introducing you to my cousin, Phil. Like a lot of us, he spends his time outdoors, hanging out with friends, and going to dinner. However, there are a few activities of his daily life that he can't do, such as brush his teeth, drink a cup of coffee, or eat dinner independently. That's why we are here to present a novel dynamic arm support that allows people like him to live with greater independence. Here in both pictures, you can see my friend Jacob trying to pull his mask up. Impossible without it. Our device enables him to scratch an itch, blow his nose, eat independently, and raise his glasses, among other activities of daily living. But he and Phil aren't alone. There are over 200,000 people in the US who have a neuromuscular disease, of which 67,000 in particular can benefit from the device right now. With this as the beachhead market and a device price of $1,500, there's a $100 million market opportunity. As for the competition, there are two main categories: powered arm supports and non-powered arm supports. The powered arm supports are pretty effective, but extremely unaffordable with the price tag of roughly $30,000. Now, the non-arm powered arm supports are relatively more affordable, ranging from $1,500 to $5,000, but are not nearly as effective. And that's where we come in. Maverick BioMedical bridges the gap by offering a device that is both affordable and effective. So let's talk about affordability. 2 out of 3 people don't consider getting an assistive device strictly because of the cost. Either they don't research because the person assumes they're too expensive, or the person does research, sees the price tag, and then they know they're too expensive. We combat this first one by having the term affordable in our motto. And we combat the second one by living out our motto with a device that costs less than $1,500. Put differently, people only must ask themselves one question when they think of our device. Would you give up just 3 coffees a week over 3 years to let your child use their arms? The answer is a resounding yes. So let's talk about user independence. Looking at the graph of required lifting force for someone with severe muscle weakness in their arm, the black line shows the actual force needed to provide accurate support at whatever level a person raises their arm. These yellow and red lines show the support that current devices on the market offer. As you can see, they come nowhere close to meeting the required support if a user wants to raise their arm more than 3 inches. That's not very effective. However, our device's patent-pending weight compensation mechanism provides almost the exact support curve needed, represented here by the blue line. And beyond superior affordability and user independence, we firmly believe assisted tech is something that you should be proud to show off, which is achievable through badass design. This is why we offer an optional wheelchair mount, tapered arm cradle, padded armrest, and best of all, color personalization. If you want to make it Ferrari blue, let's do it. If you want to make it Corvette red, let's do it. If you want to make it fighter jet matte black, be a Maverick. Let's do it. For revenue in the short term, our website will allow people to buy a device directly, connect with their local DMEs, plus research and compare devices all on the same platform. For revenue in the long term, we will be using advertising in a different way than existing companies. If someone wants insurance to cover a device, they need a letter of medical necessity from their occupational therapist. Therefore, the advertising money ultimately goes towards the occupational therapist. However, if we peel back the layers, we can get to the occupational therapist through the other direction at the root of this tree. That is by advertising to the occupational therapist through their education. Since this is a much more effective use of advertising and sales money, we plan on being implemented into the curriculum of every occupational therapy school in the country. Now, we don't design for people, we design with them. We've had 5 successful tests with people locally, and there are now 18 people signed up and waiting for a beta test. We just need the money to make enough devices for everybody. And here's the squad that's gonna do it. I have a background in mechanical engineering and technology commercialization. Grace brings experience in hospital partnerships, nursing, and clinical trials. Dr. Matt Levy has a PhD in biophysics and is an experienced grant writer. And Kevin Connors is a retired medical device venture capitalist. Combined, we have the noggin, knowledge, and network to effectively scale this company. Now, looking forward, the company will soon be registered with the FDA and the device listed as a Class 1 medical device. We are establishing clinical partnerships across the country, and we'll be working with contract manufacturers to produce the first commercial batch of this revolutionary device. Once established in the beachhead market, we'll be pushing into the follow-on market of stroke therapy. And our commitment to superior affordability, user independence, and badass design doesn't stop there. For those that need further assistance, we'll be developing a power assist model that can be retrofitted onto the original device. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and we look forward to having you join us in promoting affordable independence through badass design.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Very succinct presentation there. The question that I always ask our presenters afterwards, and of course we don't have specific questions because our judges take all of the presentations and judge them directly on their merits. But the question I always like to ask folks is, what is the passion that keeps you doing this? I think you alluded to a little bit at the beginning, but tell us just a bit more, because doing startups is not easy. We've talked about it many times. What keeps you going in this?
So the person I introduced you to, my cousin Phil, is how the project all started. It was a school class assignment, really, for a mechanical systems lab. And I called him and I said, hey, I'm going to be working on the next 2 months for a project. Is there anything I can design for you? And so as we talked and developed it further, we got something that kind of worked for him. And then realized, if we can get it to work for you, let's get it to work for thousands of people across the country. So went out, took the device, gave it to a few people across the country, and it was horrible. It didn't work for them. And so we really had to peel back the layers and say, okay, what are the actual needs that these people are struggling with? And walking through those needs made me realize all the things that we take for granted. Being able-bodied, be able to just eat dinner independently is something I take for granted. So to provide people with the opportunity to live independently and have the opportunity to have these devices is really where my passion lies. There are things on the market that exist, but if no one can afford them, what's the point?
Very good. Well, Kevin, we really appreciate your being here today, taking the time to participate. Obviously, during the last show, we'll have our judges on, so I hope you'll tune back in and hear their comments and thoughts. But we appreciate your being here today.
Wonderful, Gene. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kevin. Really appreciate it. Well, we've come to that time, folks. If there's any community announcements, things happening in your company, your organization, the community at large, we'd love to hear about it. Feel free to pop on, raise a hand, put it in the chat, whatever works for you. We'd be happy to get that info out there. Our friend Stacy Frankovich from MedHealth, I think you are live now.
Hey, Gene. How are you?
Hey, how's it going? Good to hear your voice.
Good, good. Good to see you. I just wanted to announce to the group that we are hosting our virtual, the MedHealth Matchmaking Mixer on October 21st and 22nd. and wanted to let everybody know that registration is open. It is a free event. We match hundreds of entrepreneurs and innovators in MedTech with healthcare systems, with investors, with partners that can help them establish pipelines into resources. So we hope to have our MedTech innovators and our health systems and all of our partners join us. Again, it's a free event. Registration is open, and you can visit medhealthinnovation.org, and I'll drop it in the chat.
Drop that in the chat, and I'm just bringing up the screen there on the website, medhealthinnovation.org. There's the matchmaking mixer, October 21st and 22nd, 2021. You can find the agenda and everything else down there. Yeah, great event, Stacy. Thank you for bringing that up and popping on here. We really appreciate you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate you as well, Gene. Take care.
Before we go, I got to ask you, what's your favorite type of apple?
You know, I was listening to that, and I like a really sweet apple, so I got to go with Honeycrisp.
Okay, it's Honeycrisp again. We got some votes for Honeycrisp. I think we had at least 3 today, so we may have to just dub that the winner.
You know, I won't turn away an apple, though, if somebody offered me one.
Yeah, take all comers, right?
Exactly, exactly. Thanks,
Oh, we got an
Gene.
answer here of Northern Spy. Is that an apple brand, Steve? I don't even know that was an apple variety. Okay, I got to go do my apple research. We'll give it just another minute for any other comments or questions that may be out there. Announcements, just like Stacy did. I love it when people lead out and show us how it's done. We'll give just another second in case there's any other announcements. Not seeing any. I want to thank you for being here. Fall is rapidly upon us. We're looking forward to some great shows this fall. Looking forward to our judging coming up in a couple weeks here. Thank you for being here today. We appreciate having you with us on the 74th episode of MedTech Crossroads. We'll look forward to next week. Have a great one. Bye-bye.